Hey, everyone out there in Facebook land. We are here tonight with another great episode of Transforming the HX, meaning transforming the human experience. And I am here with Josh. And Josh, I apologize. For as long as I've known you, I've never said your last name. I just realized that.
Yeah, you're okay. Josh Brecheisen.
Brecheisen. I would
There
have
you go.
butchered that. Like people butcher my name all the time. I'm like, it shouldn't be that hard, and looking at yours, it shouldn't be that hard, but I do. So
Big long
awesome.
German last name. It's all right.
Yeah, those Germans, they know how to do it, right? Awesome. So we're here tonight because Josh is a friend of mine. We met, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago or so now, something like that, and met through a mutual mentor, I guess, Dave Austin. And I'm a certified mental performance coach, extreme focus mental
Focus.
performance coach. Yeah, there we go. And Josh is as well. And that's kind of how we met and kind of kicked off our friendship. And I've gotten to know Josh over the years, and I've been impressed, and we're gonna cover a lot of ground tonight. And I think the biggest thing that really stands out in my mind is how you just have this passion for empowering the youth. And it seems like it's not something that necessarily, it may not be where you started out at, but it's where you are today. So give us a little background on who you are, and kind of where you are these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up out in California, and I came to Utah to go to school. I played football and volleyball in high school, and then played the same in college. Ended up playing volleyball for BYU. And when I started my career after I graduated, I did what most kids do. You don't really know. You're just kind of trying to figure out what you're interested in as you're studying stuff in school. And then same thing when you get into the business world, you just kind of push, your dreams aside and kind of step into reality and get a job, grow up type of mindset. And I just really didn't have a clue, and just followed what came to me, and instead of really going after anything, just waited for things to come to me, and got involved in the recruiting industry. Turned out I'm a pretty good recruiter. So I started recruiting IT professionals and sales professionals. And I've done that for about 15 years. Started a couple of recruiting agencies. And in that process, I kind of found myself, not kind of, I found myself at a point where I was like, man, like, what am I doing? Like, how did I get where I'm at? Many people call it the midlife crisis. And when I reached that point, I just felt like I was called to do something greater. Felt like I was called to have more impact other than the dozens of people that I hired every year for a company. There was more impact that I was meant to make on society. And so I just sold my recruiting firm and started coaching, and just whatever I felt came to me naturally, just started speaking and coaching. And in that process, I coached on, how I built $1 million business, to some entrepreneurs, or to some salespeople, how I built my business and made sales, and to recruiters. So I had kind of a few logical silos. And then I met Dave Austin, and had no clue that he was going to invite me to take his stuff to the world of volleyball. I ended up playing again at BYU. We won a national championship while I was there in 2004. So I didn't even realize really how well connected I am with the volleyball community because of that, being part of BYU volleyball and national championship, and have teammates who've played professionally all over the world, who coach all over the nation now. And so it led me into this world back to my roots, which was sports and youth. And I don't know if you maybe want me to address that question. Sort of like a question there, like
Yeah, absolutely.
how did I get into the youth side of things? As a kid, I just had this understanding, and I don't know if it came from my relationship with my mom, because I was really good friends with my mom, but I always had this kind of intuitive understanding of when people were being true or fake. And I found that my teachers, they would threaten me because I was a pretty rambunctious kid, but I could just sense that it was like led by fear and immediacy. There was no like real substance behind why they wanted me to shut up, other than they just wanted me to shut up and be quiet. And so as I went through school, most of my teachers did not like me. Unfortunately, I owe them lots of apologies because I found out how to push their buttons, and I would, because I realized they couldn't do anything about it. And I started to. So I just got this sense as a youth that there's a lot of arbitrary kind of authoritative hold on youth. And some of it is not malicious. I don't mean to say that my teachers were
Right.
malicious. In most of their cases, they're overwhelmed in their schools with how many kids they have, and they just need
Right.
this one loudmouth to shut up, even though they were like honest questions, or like even just like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Like they wouldn't call on me sometimes because I always talked, I always interrupted. So even when I had a legitimate reason to raise my hand, I wouldn't get called upon. But they in this kind of situation as a kid, I realized this. And because of that, kids grow up hearing so many no's, and it starts in the home with our parents. Our parents are overwhelmed. They don't know how to exactly parent. Nobody. I know very few people who take parenting classes, and it's
Wait,
more common.
do they have such a thing? Is there a manual or something? I didn't know about this.
Right? And I've actually taken a couple now because I was like, man, I'm not the best parent. I need parenting classes, so that I don't end up being the same person that I, always wanted to disrupt as a youth. But, we just end up like just saying things like, be quiet, and why, mom, why? Like, I don't know. I just need you to stop, right? And we hear no, 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 no so many times. By the time we're an adult, it just creates this suppression in us. And even like I mentioned, how I ended up getting into recruiting, it was because I realized at some point you have to grow up and get a real job.
Right.
And I just pushed some of those more creative thoughts and ideas out to step into the real world. And I just now 15 years into my career, having helped hundreds of people get jobs and talked with thousands of people to coach them in their careers, I just got this itch to help people, and I knew I could help in those areas. And it started with like kind of helping some youth to figure out their path and not go
Right.
through the same pains, not have their midlife crisis like me and want to switch careers, but maybe just follow their dreams from the start.
Hmm.
And that was the evolution there, and how I really started to get into the coaching and into coaching youth.
So it's a fascinating story because I think, like you, most people in our age range bracket, if you will, I'm a little bit older than you. My midlife crisis probably started happening around the same time. I don't think I've gotten out of it yet, but I'm 10 years into my midlife crisis. Let's say it that way.
That's
Um,
good.
so, but I think it's true that we start out, we're told you've got to do things, you've got to get a real job, you've got to do things this way or that way, and in part, I think there's maybe in human nature there's that element of it, but I also think it's the time frame that we grew up in, because we're kind of these border kids between like computers coming in. We had to kind of, in a sense, learn how to do things the old way, and then as we're going through high school and college, there's all this new way of doing things, right? I mean, you graduated what, around 2000 or so from high school?
I graduated in 98.
Okay.
So yeah, I was born in 79. So yeah, I consider, like that's the border of, do you consider yourself a Gen X or a Gen Z, like
Right.
81, 82?
Yeah.
I 100% identify with, the X Gen
Yeah.
MTV generation, like that. That's my generation.
Yeah, and so I was born in 75, so I'm like a little bit further in, but I get it. It's like we're right at that edge where a little bit of both, you know. Um, and I think for us it's kind of like, what do we do? And what's the pathway? Because my brothers before me, it was pretty clear what they were going to do. They're all, engineering and kind of following in my dad's footsteps that way. But I didn't have that clarity either. It was like I was like you, one of those kids that I did well enough in school, but I always had to ask questions. I always wanted to know why things had to be that way. And it took me down a different path for a long time. So it's cool to hear that story from your perspective. I love that you're working now with the youth and trying to help them in that path. What would you say, was there something that happened there that really turned it for you, or was it just kind of an evolution of a series of events that came together?
In the event of trying to actually follow what I
Yeah,
really
like moving
wanted to
from your
do.
recruiting, being good at that, but looking at kind of saying, okay, now I want to go this direction. Was that like an overnight thing, or was that a?
No, in fact, when I first started going, I've studied the Gallup Strengths Finder for years, and
Mhm.
that's I started to coach people on it with their businesses because I actually created a really cool methodology which Paul Allen, not the Paul Allen the Greater, we call Paul Allen the Lesser, not Microsoft Paul Allen, but Paul Allen the Lesser, who started Ancestry.com and now runs a company called SOAR, which is a platform to connect coachees with coaches, which really great guy. He said that I have the most unique methodology for helping people put their strengths into application. and
Mm.
and and so I really created this kind of cool process, and I was coaching people on it. And in that process of coaching people on it and teaching people how I built my business, I started to realize I you know I wasn't using my strengths exactly the way I should. My strengths are to win others over, to create positivity, have great communication, to build belief in myself and others and build others up. And it was like, I need to make better use of those.
Mhm.
And so it became kind of this awareness, self-awareness. And then it started to be, yeah, I can't just follow my dreams. Are you kidding me? I've got a mortgage. I've got a family. Like, I can't just up and follow my dreams. Like, that's ridiculous. So I have to do it in a way that makes sense. And for me at the stage, like midlife, it may have to be that way where you take a step. I always say there's a step one and a step two for some of us who are in this situation. And step one is you just step into your dream, but within the context of what you've been doing for your whole career. So that's why I started, okay, probably coaching and speaking is my dream. And so I took this step into it, but just used the practical things that I had that I
Mhm.
knew could make me the most money the fastest. Even though my ultimate dream, and I didn't even know it yet, my ultimate dream would be speaking to athletes, young athletes, and
Right.
coaching young athletes. But it took me a step one to get brave enough where I could even step away from all the fear
Mhm.
and leave that behind and step into coaching in some sort of practical way, and then step in to what I really wanted to be coaching in and my real passion. Because early on, I did explore this.
Mhm.
I did say, Josh, you do have an opportunity to potentially play some semi-pro or really, really not make much money pro volleyball, which I probably could have done down in Brazil. I speak fluent Portuguese, and I have some ins down there, right? I could have done something. I could have coached, and I even looked into it. But what I always did well was I always called and talked to people. And I called and talked to some coaches and stuff, and they'd be like, Josh, like, you one day you're the head coach, the next you have your feet chopped out from underneath you and you're back to scouting. You can't see your family ever. You're making $30,000 a year again. And it's tough to have that happen every 5 to 7 years. So I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, no. Yep, that's not me. I didn't realize, and that's where I was like following this construct that was built throughout my life, that there's one way to do it. And it's like the only way was you could be a player or a coach. No clue that there was this whole other side where you could be coaching from home. And, honestly, early on, it didn't really exist, but there were ways to do it. I just didn't know. And I knew there were guys like Tony Robbins and stuff. I used to listen to their stuff in college, and but I just didn't put two and two together that could be me within sports, and I could do it in a practical way that, you know what I mean? And so I just followed the fear.
Right.
And so that held me back. And then when I finally allowed myself to break that fear and step into something practical, to then take the next step. But it was about a 3-year discovery from when I said I'm stepping away from my business to finding exactly what I want to coach in.
It's interesting because I think that I hear that story from people that have made that mid-career, midlife shift, that they were following what they were told, the way it was told to them. And even you're talking right there about the coaches and players, but even your career in recruiting, you were probably following the way it was supposed to be done, and then you kind of open the door a little bit and say, okay, I'm ready to let that go. Well, now you can talk to salespeople, and you can talk to recruiters, you can talk to entrepreneurs. So it's like you open that whole realm there, which probably wasn't something you planned to do at any point in time necessarily.
No, which is funny. In fact, I called my brother. This is a funny story. Well, first I called my wife, and she was like busy with kids. I can hear the kids screaming, just like crawling all over her, right? She's like, honey, I gotta go. I was like so psyched because I'd made this decision, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna be a speaker and a coach. And she's like, yeah, honey, I can't hear you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I was like, all right, bye, honey. Like, I'll let you go. And then, I call my dad, and my dad's a mechanic, so he's retired, but he's working on something in the house. He's like, what was that, son? And I'm like, all right, I'll let you go, Dad. And then, I'm just so excited to tell somebody. And then I call my brother up, and he'll admit he's apologized for this, but I called him up and was like, hey, he's a really, really successful businessman and sales consultant, and lives in London. And I was like, hey, I want to be a speaker and a coach. And his response was, at first I was like so excited because, hey, finally someone's listening to me, giving their
Right.
full undivided attention. But his response was, yeah, you got to have a lot more experience for anyone to want to listen to you, Josh. I
Oh my
was like,
gosh.
whop, right? It's just like chopped. So it doesn't matter. Like, you will, like, no matter what, when you try to go after your dream, there's gonna be
Yeah.
people expect you to follow this path, and they expect everyone, if others were successful following this path, even my brother, he was just conditioned to think, well, no, to be successful at that, I don't even do that yet, and I want to do that, is what I think he was thinking. And I'm way more successful than you, and right? In his mind, right? I know, because I probably would have been thinking that too if my little brother called and said that to me. And it was just because that's the construct that he has in his mind. And so we're all stuck in the matrix, man. I won't go that far, but we follow this,
Yeah.
what we kind of been told, and what we believe is the way. And it's hard to break free from the fear.
Well, and that's interesting too, because when I hear you say that, people are conditioned, they see you in a certain way. And I come from a large family, and one of my older brothers, who I respect greatly, is, bought a business and grow that business over years. And there was one point where early in the business, I had done a little bit of consulting, for him. It was, right out of the gate when I started my consulting business, and that, and things went well and all that. But then, there's kind of this, we had conversations after that, but I didn't do any consulting for him for a while. And he came back to me because he heard something I said, and he's like, maybe come on over here and let's talk. And this time had passed, and I had done a lot of stuff in the middle of that. And so he came back, he heard him say this to someone else, but I was in the room at the time. He's like, Tony's really changed. Like, it's like you're stuck in that mindset. Like you were this as a kid, maybe this is a young adult, whatever else. And so, and that's, it's nothing on them at all. It's how we all are. And
Yeah.
so let's dive a little bit deeper there. I want to take that and go a little deeper. So we've got kids today who are growing up in the pace of change and transformation is ridiculously fast. I mean, and I've had different comparisons like iPhone and all that. And look how the world's changed in 13 years, right? Since it was released in June of 2007. But I look back now a couple months ago. In March, we went into lockdown here in Nashville. And I mean, literally overnight, the kids went from classroom to bedroom, and they're learning, online. And parents. I fortunately work from home a lot myself, so it didn't affect me much. But a lot of other parents are going from, their office job to working remote. And the kids, I think, have had so much change. What's your take on what's happening for them right now? Because I know some of them are getting ready to go back to school. They just announced in Nashville here today that they're going to go start school virtually and then hopefully get back into school, in face-to-face, if you will.
That's a really interesting question, because one of the biggest things I tell young people in their careers, when I'm coaching strictly on careers, and you could be any age, high school or whatever, is life is just so much more complex today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You look at the 50s and 60s, for example. Everybody had this toy, that toy, and the other, right? Everybody had Stretch Armstrong. Everybody can tell you a story about Stretch Armstrong because there were no other toys. Everybody had Lincoln Logs and Stretch Armstrongs, right? And there were obviously a few other toys, but it was so simple. Now there's a million types of little action figures, all the way from high quality to low quality. It's the same in the marketplace. Because of that, when you go into your career, you have to start so much earlier. An example, I do a lot of IT recruiting. To get into IT recruiting is difficult, but once you've got 2-3 years of experience, oh man, you will take off. You'll be making six figures like that. Right? And so it's a great industry for young people to look into. When I IT engineering, software development and that sort of stuff. And that means that you should start in college working summers for free, whatever you need to be working for enterprise companies that have an enterprise environment. We call it, just means big in the IT world. That's all enterprise means. But if you're working for big companies early on in your career, you're going to come out and just hit the ground running. And so it just requires us to start at an earlier age, which it does put more pressure on you the younger you are. There's no doubt. But my advice is to not worry about the pressure, to just get started somewhere in something you like. It's okay if you go to do it and then you realize you don't want to do it. That's okay. A lot of people get hung up because they're like, no, I have to find the one thing that I was meant to do my whole life, right? It's like, it's a process. And so it's okay. So that really ties into what I do a lot of coaching around that subject, and everything being complex and changing. This is something that I know a lot about. I moved 13 times. Was it 13 times by the time I was 21? No way. Well, it had to have been way more than that, because my mission, I move on your LDS mission. I served an LDS mission in Brazil. You move every other month. So yeah, so I moved at least it's got to be like 9 times before the time I left for that, and then probably moved 10 times while I was on my mission in Brazil. So I've learned to adapt to change. in that regard. And that's one thing that I feel like I can identify with the younger generation, because there's so much change. When you're someone like me who has never lived in a home more than 2 to 3 years, we've been living in our home now for 4.5 years. They're like, oh, hey, look at that.
Time to move.
Yeah, I was like, I've never lived in one place for this long. This is odd. And so you just what it will do for these youth. This is an amazing time where it will help them be more adaptable in everything they do in life. They're going to be able to say, hey, you think this is bad.
It'll be the equivalent of our walking uphill both ways in snow or something like that, right?
Yeah.
You didn't go through 2020.
Hey, you didn't have 2020 vision.
I had to roll out of my bed and sit on the edge of my bed to do school in 2020. You don't have to do that. You get to go to a classroom.
Yeah, I mean, they really will. They really will. So I think the key for the youth right now is to just keep moving forward. The sun's going to come up tomorrow, and to keep focusing on how the challenges of today are going to make them stronger and better for tomorrow when the sun comes up again, because it will come up again.
I think that's a really, really good point. And there's two things that I want to kind of talk about. So I'll put them both out here so we can get back to the other one. First one is the resilience, and this, which is what you're talking about right now, is helping these kids realize that it's time to build resilience, and what does that mean and how to do that. The second piece, I think I'll take this one first because I think it's a shorter piece, but we'll come back to resilience on after this. What I find really fascinating is I hear kids all the time. My daughters are the same way. At least one of them is more this way than the other one, but there's this idea that there's the one thing I do in life, right? I got to make the right choice for college. I got to go in the right thing for college. And I'm like, kids, I got a freaking history major and I'm doing customer experience work. I'm doing podcasting. I mean, they didn't teach this in college because it didn't exist in college, when I was there. But beyond that, there's this whole thing that something struck me as you were talking, and that is that they get caught up in this. There's only one way to do it for life. But if you look at everything else in their life, the games they play are all about leveling up. It's about access. They don't accumulate anything. They pick up the tools they need when they need to. They're very adaptable in the game itself. Take what's in my pack, take it out. Oh, I don't need that. Drop it on the ground, pick up something else, put it back in my pack, and I'm off I go. They build worlds in Minecraft and Sim and all that other stuff. I mean, it's like, but in life, they get stuck in this pigeonhole. And I don't know if it's because of what they see in the world around them, but they just can't make that break from reality in life that they can do in the video games, and then they can do when they're working with apps on their phone and everything else. So I'm just curious what your take is, because that just hit me actually as you were talking there about how there's this discrepancy or this dichotomy between how they live their life and what they think about life.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So my kids are that way too, right? My kids are all under 10 years old, and they can use phones maybe better than I can. And my 4-year-old plays video games way better than me, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
I still can't control the characters on screen as I go through a second world or whatever else.
I was like, hey man, I had the first Nintendo, and I seriously am behind. My little boy can play it better than me. So yeah, I think that there is this feeding of information to, I think it started with millennials and then Gen Z and now even the youngest generation now, where it's really being this concept is being fed to them pretty regularly. That what I'm like, oh, now I'm spacing on what I was going to say on they have this concept of passion, like, and if you've ever seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians, Americans and their passion, right? But I love that movie. It's hilarious. But there's this idea of like, oh, what are you passionate about? Follow your passion. It gets fed to them. It's been fed, again, more towards millennials. I think we were more taught, like, I think like Michael J. Fox, right? Like, not Risky Business, but what was that one movie with Michael J. Fox and the Secret of My Success. Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox. I always kind of identified with that in my generation as being like, it was about getting in, working your way up, like, wheeling and dealing. Where now these younger generations, it's all about like, find your passion and follow your passion. So I think there's this narrative, which is a good narrative. I'm not knocking the narrative, but then it makes them think, it's like, I got to find out what my passion is. And then they get fixated on this idea that it's only one thing. And what I do when I work with youth is I get them to think that you may have one passion now. You may have 3 passions. You may have 5 things that you love, but you should enumerate them, write them down, and just start exploring them. In fact, I know like a lot of teachers will hate that I say this, but
that's okay. Teachers hate you anyway, so.
They do, since my youth. But, and I love teachers, but I just think the subjects that they're forced to teach are bad. I think once you reach an elementary level, maybe to 7th, 8th grade level of understanding of math, reading, and science, that you should now have opportunities to start learning about your passions and different careers and how they match up. And I think that's all school should be from high school on. And because, again, this world is getting more and more complex. I mean, that's why kids are getting associate's degrees before they even graduate from high school. And I really think we're doing ourselves a disservice by forcing people to double down on what they're bad at. Oh, you're not good in arithmetic? Well, let's get you a tutor. No, I can pass basic math through 8th grade. Get me out of it if I stink at it and I don't want to do it, and put me into something that I'm awesome at, because maybe you're great at science, and maybe in that process you'll discover, well, to be a great scientist, I need to know a lot of math. Right? And then maybe
your passion will be potentially feeding you to do it, or you find an alternative path.
Yeah. And so that's the key. So map them out and then just start following. Choose one and follow it. And it's okay. It's okay if all you get out of that is, well, that's not what I want to do. Mm-hmm. You're so much farther ahead of so many people. And the earlier you do that, the better.
It's fascinating because you're right. The pressure on kids to learn I look at what my daughters, one just turned 15 and 116. She turned 17 next month. And I'm looking at what they're learning in algebra, when they did algebra 1, I'm like, I don't remember even doing that in algebra 2. I'm serious. I'm like, I'm looking at this up. They're studying what they're studying in science. Okay. I graduated from high school in 93. So we're talking, 30 years ago now. Is that 25? I don't know. It's a ways back. Yeah. But they didn't even have that because our science books were older than that too, so you got to go back another, like the science books they're using today are maybe 10 or 15 years old. It's like, no, gravity is not something that pushes. It's like, it's like they don't even have the stuff defined properly, but what they're learning is so far more advanced than what I learned. And it's like, okay, you can't just keep shoving knowledge in, an increasing amount of knowledge in at a younger age and not expect it to work right. I'm on path with you there. So, okay. So let's go back, because I think this ties back to the resilient side of things. How do we help kids, not just in COVID-19, but how do we help kids develop resilience? I personally believe that resilience is going to be the most necessary skill in this next 5 to 10 years. I think if you don't have resilience or don't know how to become resilient, you are going to be in serious problems, a mental, physical, everything.
I will have to find the source for you for this, because I'm going to mention something, and I'll send you the source that you can then put in in the notes here. But Paul Allen, the founder of Ancestry.com, big into genealogy, obviously, he sent me an article, and it was really interesting. It was about mental resiliency. And it referenced that the study found that kids who knew their family stories had more mental resilience than other
Interesting.
kids. So it kind of ties into what you said, like how can what's going on now, uh, how can you get through it and use it for good, with the pandemic? Like that's it. Learn the stories of the past, of your ancestors. Learn the stories of Americans, if you're in
Hmm.
America, of how they went through the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, and learn from that. Learn the stories in your own family and tell the stories in your family. One of the most effective way, I'll bring it back to what I've done for most of my career in recruiting. The most effective way to land jobs is to tell amazing stories about things that you've done. You don't have to go, like people go in and they're so rigid. I tell you what, you answer questions and you're super rigid, like, oh, I want this job because it's something I've always wanted to do and it would be so meaningful, versus you walk in, let's say you walk in an interview with a medical company and a medical startup, and you say, my mom died of cancer,
Hmm.
and you tell the story of her death, and that pushed you into wanting to do something meaningful in the medical industry. Now I'm just getting emotional
Yeah.
talking about that, because I've had people tell me those kind of things, right, as I've coached them, and and they're not gonna forget that. They're not gonna
Right.
forget the way you made them feel with powerful stories. So it's really interesting, this resiliency and this tie to powerful stories about people connected to you, and the closer they're connected to you, it creates this resilience. I just look at my story. My father was 12 years old. This is a tragic story. He was crossing a river with his little brother who was 10 years old, and they lived in a dam town. Literally, there was a dam next to their town, and they let out the floodwaters, and the floodwaters came and took my dad and his little brother away. And um, tragic, my dad couldn't hold on to his little brother,
Mm.
and he passed away. And so he had to go through life feeling like he killed his little brother.
Mm.
And so that made him seek to understand life and God, and some of the ways were good, some of the ways were bad, but he learned and grew. So now, knowing that story, I have so much more resilience, because I'm like, if my dad can get through that, I can get through what I'm going through now.
That
Do you
is
see that?
that is so fascinating, because I think you've done a good job of describing what it is, mental resilience. I've never heard that term before, but telling the stories of the past is really interesting. It's interesting to me because a couple of years ago, I've always been intrigued by genealogy, but I've never done the work of it myself. I've read it, but a few years ago, one of my second cousins, first removed, or somewhere in that lineage there, he reached out, and he shared some new history that he had discovered. He was writing a paper for a genealogy magazine or journal or something in that, and I start digging in, and so we came. I'm from Wisconsin. We lived in Wisconsin for probably the last 150 years or so. We've got lineage there, and the French part of my family, we can track back to the 1600s when they came over into Canada and all of that. So like there's kind of this history. Well, at one point they tracked it all the way back that we have some lineage that goes to it was Charlemagne, Charles the Great, which is 800, So there's kind of a cool, as a history buff, I'm like, oh, that's awesome to kind of be able to say that, right? But then you start looking at the stories of more recent history, and I was actually looking at the plots of land from 1840 or 50 when they start coming into Wisconsin, and I saw all of these similar family names, not our families, but the other families, and how they all rotated together. And then you see as they started to move from one town to the next, as it got more and more populated in those areas. And it got me thinking, just like I said, about a year, 2 years ago, got me thinking, like, how many of these families were so close knit before, and now a couple generations later, we don't even know who they are. We don't know how they were connected, but they're on all the baptismal certificates. They're on the marriage licenses. They're on the death certificates as the witnesses in that. And we don't even know who these people are. But half of Wisconsin's probably populated by all our families now. It's like, and
Yeah.
so it's fascinating. But it got me really in touch. Like, wow, we actually have. When I grew up in Wisconsin, it was like I felt like, because my parents had moved from where a lot of this had happened to a different town, and we were an hour and a half away. So I didn't really grow up around that side of my family at all. So they were always very distant from a cousin's perspective and all that. And so there was this kind of disconnection, like we were this island. That's kind of just the perspective I always had. But then as I started reading this, I'm like, oh wow, we went through a lot of stuff. And then one of my distant relatives, they went over to Minnesota when Minnesota was just being settled in that era, and they were putting in gas lines or something like that, and there was this massive collapse, and he died in the collapse, and his wife they just had a baby or something. So you start reading these stories about it, and you're like,
Yeah.
this is 150 years ago, 100 years ago that this stuff was happening, and you become connected. So I appreciate that, because I've never thought about that idea of mental resilience and what it means to people, and especially today when we get so caught up in what's happening in the moment, which can be good to be present, but to not be able to bring the past with us, we forget who we were and
Yeah.
the generations that came before us.
And I mean, even we're talking about like the racial things that are going on in our country right now. I think it's so great to learn more and more about Black history and how it ties into our country. And especially if you're Black, man, like, I hope that those stories are empowering for you and help you be more resilient, right? And help you become stronger. So I think it's really relevant to the youth right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that, because one of my daughters is just an absolute brilliant researcher at her early age. I don't know where she got it from, but she loves digging in, and so she's telling me all these stories of things. And then as we start going around Nashville and looking at sites and that over the last year or two, as she's dug into this research, it was before the recent events that have happened. But then we start finding out, like, Nashville, where I live here, was one of those places where they actually, like, the sit-ins at the diner counters and that, they practiced them here before they went to some of the other places, like in Alabama and places like that. So Nashville has this
Mm.
history of kind of a testing ground for what can we do in the civil rights movement. And then they just constructed, or they're in the process of constructing right now, a suffragettes memorial and all of that, because here in Nashville, the suffragettes actually kind of experimented and were leading the way. And so it's fascinating to me. It's like, I've lived here for
It's
20
cool.
years. I never really knew this. And all this history is coming out in the last few years where they're starting to talk about it. And so I think it's really impactful to start to know that history. Whether you're Black or not, you've got to be able to look at this and say, for what is it, something like 90% of Blacks that lived in America in the early to mid 1800s, I think it was, were slaves.
Yeah.
And you start to look at that and say, okay, look at that, at that, what that meant. We can look back in our family history and know how the decisions, or what a generation or 3 generations or 5 generations ago did, and how that may have impacted us. Like, I come from a line of farmers. I know that, right? And I know what they did. But if they can look back and see how their family survived, and then, even if they're not thriving today, how did they survive? How can they pull from that with that mental resilience that you talk about, so that they can thrive today? I think that's a really powerful thing to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just take this healthy, really healthy pride that if they could do it, you could do it, right? And that's always been one of my favorite phrases. When I hear really successful people say that, it's always just touched me, because it's like, that's one of the things that made me excel in my business was when I finally sat across from a CEO and I didn't feel inferior anymore. You know, and those are big moments for you as a kid as you grow up and a young professional. You start to realize that. But I really think that the more stories you have behind you that you carry with you, it strengthens you. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's dive. We've talked around the topic for a little while, but I want
Yeah.
to dive deeper into what you do in the volleyball space. And you've got this thing called VB Mindsetter. So talk to us about what that is and what you bring to these youth athletes to really help them build that emotional resilience, that mental resilience, that ability to really get out there and perform at their best.
Well, it starts with the the first concept. I think most people, especially this year, it's on their minds. Actually, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant had the Mamba mentality. What was that? Well, it's essentially he steps on the court. He's not a person anymore. He's a beast,
Hmm.
right? And that comes from Dave Austin's teachings. But obviously, Kobe Bryant, I don't think he's ever. Maybe Dave. I don't know. Dave knows everybody, but um, maybe Dave did. It was Inception, and
Right.
and Kobe Bryant started getting the Mamba mentality. But it's this idea that you can step onto the court and if you focus not on what's going on around you, but focus on what behaviors make you the biggest, baddest animal on earth, you just stop worrying about things. Animals miss their meal. If a lion misses its meal, it's not over crying and depression and thinking its life is over, and like I used to
Right.
when I was playing. But I wish I had these tools when I was playing, right? And so it's like, boom, now you're empowered. You're like, no, a lion just says, all right, I gotta eat, I gotta survive. Where's my next meal coming from? And so that starts with that, teaching them how to embody something that helps them step away from the moment, step away from their fears and all those things that we've talked about, right? So really it's applicable in any part of their life, but I'm first teaching them how to use this in a concentrated area, and then they'll start to realize, oh my goodness, like this is applicable pretty much everywhere in my life. And then we do kind of like it sounds kind of funny to say, it sounds like kind of woo woo, but a little bit of a hypnosis, right? We call the game ready, and you're familiar with it, but as an extreme focus coach. But you know, meditation is very much accepted in society, and those who don't should, if you're religious and you think meditation is weird, you should probably read the Bible, because meditation is mentioned in the Bible. So it's really just this idea of just like becoming one and like letting things go, like emptying your mind, where hypnosis is focusing your mind on something very specific, right? And so it's a little bit of a hypnosis where we help them get in the zone and how to stay there longer, and it becomes a simple pre-performance preparation tool that we give them, that they can listen to. You can do them live, or you can have recordings and do them right before you go and play. It just elevates your level of play. There's all sorts of studies out there about how tracking and monitoring deep breathing makes your mind more aware. So you're more aware as an athlete if you're going through these things that we take you through. There's all sorts of science that talks about visualization and how it helps you build new neural pathways that make you feel like you've already been there and done that, so you're not scared in the moment, and you actually feel like you've already done them. You know the motions to go through. And so it's just such a empowering experience to have this little tool that you just do right before every time you play. And then you go out and play and you're like, who am I? Like, I'm a different person. You start to realize that this is something that you could do in everything in life. It's extremely empowering, and like I've mentioned, like that's just so, I feel like it's such a passion of mine to help empower people in ways that I didn't feel empowered as a kid.
Yeah, it's I think what I love most about the work that you do, and again, I've been trained in a lot of the similar things, but I think we all take our own approach to it once we get into it. And we've talked about school, right? So kids are all day learning and memorizing facts and figures and history and science and whatever else it is. But I don't think there's a single time, well, at least when I was growing up, that they really talked about emotions, much less taught you how to memorize emotions. And if from my perspective, if we can help people memorize what it feels like when they're at their best, that's the trigger for higher performance. And it doesn't matter, again, it could be in volleyball, it could be taking a test, it really doesn't matter. And if you think about it, and this is just kind of my take on it, is if you've got a child who is, struggling in a sport, right? The baseball players are known for this. I just can't hit. I'm in a rut, right? They use that language all the time, and then they get the belief system going. I'm in a rut. I need something outside of me to get me out of this rut, right? Yeah. I gotta wear my hat backwards and my shoes on the wrong feet or something.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what it is, though, is they have memorized what it feels like to fail, and every time they step up to the plate, they go back emotionally, that emotion fires first. And so then their body reacts to that emotion and they continue to fail because they get that programming down. The same is true on testing. If you look at testing for kids that get nervous with testing or just cannot perform well on testing, yes, there may be some neurological things going on as well, but a lot of times it's that emotion side that they've memorized. I'm not a good test taker. Or I remember this test that I took back in first grade that I bombed, and I remember how I felt when the teacher said something. And so that goes with them all the way through high school, maybe even into college, because they keep remembering the feeling of it. But this
and they're telling them those stories.
Exactly.
So stories, the negative stories, break down resilience.
Exactly. The opposite. What is the opposite of resilience? I mean, I don't even know what the word is for that, but we'll have to look that up later. But where I was going with that is the game ready that you do, it very much puts people into the state of a particular emotion. They feel a particular way, and when they remember that, they can and get into that feeling tone, like they remember where they feel it in their body, what it feels like, all of that. They go through that process, and using an animal as an example can help them to remember that faster. But once they get there, then their body automatically reacts to the situation, and that's where their peak level performance, because they get out of their head and into their body, literally.
Yes. And to your point, I mean, some of the greatest breakthroughs I've had with some of my professional players have been simply, it can get so complex, and literally I'll just say, hey, how was practice today? And they'll be like, hey, I did this awesome thing, right? And I said, okay, remember how that felt, right? And I just tell them, remember how that felt. So we're going to make sure we remember that when we do your game ready before your match this week, right? And it really just like, it's that simple sometimes. It's like, oh man, all I have to do is remember how I felt when I did something right. It's like, yeah, it can be that simple. And it goes the same way when I do career coaching. One of the questions I ask is, when is a time that you felt like you did something and you even amazed yourself? You just had no clue, like, of your own brilliance. You're like,
I love that.
How did I do that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's times where I look back, I'm like, wow, how did I do that? I rolled off a plane one time playing flag football. It was a pretty competitive league. Like, Jerry Rice used to come out and play in those same leagues I played in out in Northern California. And after he was retired, not during his career. And I rolled off a plane. The plane was late. I rolled up, and the whole tournament was already over. They were in the last game, the championship game, and they just scored, and they could either go for one and tie it or go for two, and we win it. And I literally rolled in. They're like, Josh, get in here. I get into the huddle, and they're like, this is the situation. I'm like, what? I missed the whole day, right? I couldn't believe it. And they're like, the quarterback goes, all right, we're running this play, and I'm throwing it to Josh. Can everybody live with that? And everybody's like, yeah. And I'm like, wait, I haven't even touched a ball yet. And I'm like, all right. So I go in, and boom, I catch it. We win. They carry me off. Like, we're just like, we go out for, well, they drink. I don't drink, but we go out, drinking later, right? And so, but I was like, how did I even do that? And it's just like and it can be that way, that's a sports analogy, but like, it's that way with, sometimes I'm that way with math. It's like, how did I even figure that out? I don't know. I just think like that. And that's where you can find your brilliance.
I love that example, especially relating it to business, because in the work I do with customer experience, as an example, I don't just use the software. Like we've got software that does text mining and all that nerdy stuff, right? But I'll actually go read a lot of the feedback, and I know about how much I have to read. And I was doing this for a very large company. Pretty much everyone would know the company, but I can't talk about it. So
yep.
I was doing this work with them. We were working on this project, and they had an organizational psychologist. No, I'm sorry, a developmental psychologist who was on the team. She was sitting at the cube behind me, and all of a sudden she's like, I don't know if we're gonna get like really discover anything in this data. And I was like, no. I said, I feel the buzz. I feel the buzzing in my head. I'm gonna get a discovery in the next 12 hours. And she's like, and as a psychologist, like, what the heck?
He's like, you're crazy.
And so she's like, okay, tell me more about this, And actually, I don't think she asked at that point. She just kind of like observed. Within 12 hours, I had some pretty significant breakthroughs, and I was able to statistically prove what I had reached intuitively. And so she goes back. She's like, how does that work? Talk me through this. And I kind of talked her through the process, and there's a particular feeling I get. And when I get that feeling, I know that intuitively I've picked up on something, but I can't consciously yet tell you what it is. And so I have to read until I get to that point. And so it's a way of me being my resilience, because I know when I hit that point, and if I don't hit it, I'm like, there may not be anything in this data, like especially if the statistics don't back it up, then there may be nothing there.
And what I love about that story, Tony, is there's this battle going on, and I think it's an unnecessary battle. There's a battle going on in the business world, and it's whether intuition and gut feeling is as good as data.
Yes.
There's that shirt. There's a shirt that I see often as I go to IT conferences that says data, and then it has a greater than sign and opinion. It's like, that's like, okay, the example you just gave, it was not just a feeling, but it was backed by data. And I think the more that kids realize that as they move forward in life, when they start marrying data with feeling, that's when there's going to be this new level of attainment. And we talk about even in the recruiting world, we talk about how AI can now identify candidates almost as well as recruiters can. It's like, are recruiters all going to be out of jobs? Well, no, because right now, at least for the next 20, 30 years, robots are not going to be able to have the intuitive gut feelings and be able to have those conversations in the right way to influence people, right? And to see the connection that maybe the data doesn't make.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just think it's really fascinating that you brought that up. Again, kind of all things that I think are going to come from the greatness of our younger generations.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think the more we can tie those two, it's funny because I have told people, I'll be sitting in meetings with executives and be like, something about this data doesn't feel right. And they're like, you mean you don't think the data's right? I'm like, no, it doesn't feel right. I'm very clear about that. I choose those words. And honestly, it's like I have called myself. There was going to write a book at one point about the intuitive analyst or something like that would really kind of throw people off. I may get to it someday, but
I like that.
There is power in being able to. It's not just operating from emotion, but it's recognizing and respecting that there's an information system in our body, and that does. It's not about how we think. And we had Pierre Debar. I don't know you know Pierre. He was on here last week, and he just went deeper. He blew my mind because he went deeper than even stuff I knew, which was like, crap. I love that. But it's like there's all this information in the body that emotions are giving us, and if we don't at least look at them and try to understand them. Now, sometimes they can be way off, like fear. I've been talking about fear a lot this week for, a couple of reasons it came up. Fear can be misleading, but if we look at why we're feeling the sense of fear, what is it we're really feeling, we can unlock something there potentially. And so it's interesting. So coming back to your volleyball work and coaching there with the game readies and what you do, it's all about getting people into a feeling state first, so that they can perform after that.
And then they start to see the data. And that's, again, this whole marriage. It's like, wow, you're right. Like one of my pro players, I just said, start paying attention to how you're feeling. And then he went into a drill and he's like, I just said, I'm going to feel good today. And I made a play. And it felt so good. I was like, I can do this. And then I made another and another and another. And then we went over into the even tougher, or then we went from the toughest drill to the easy drill. And I was like, all day long, I can, he was a libero. So he's like, oh yeah, I can dig this all day long. Defensive player is the libero's a name for a defensive player. And it was just like, boom. Then all of a sudden you start seeing the numbers, you start seeing the data. And that's when, as a player, you go, all right. It's like, wow, I just went off. I had a young high school player. She came out and she scored like 4 out of the first 5 points of the game, because she was just on fire. So, and there just happened to be a couple of situations where the setter was kind of forced to set to her, which is always good. But it was like, hey, you start to see it and not just feel it. So,
well, it's interesting because you said something there, and I want to dig a little deeper into that spot, and that is a lot of the work that you do is about kind of guiding people or leading them. I'll use the term gently, right? You're not saying, hey, if you don't feel good, feel good. Just decide you're going to feel good. It's not about that, because there's a lot of that mentality out there, and I think there's value in that to some extent, but I think oftentimes, especially at least what I'm seeing with this generation, is that they feel bad, they feel worse, they feel guilty if they can't feel good. And so this is not about telling people you have to feel good or you should feel good or feel good, damn it. It's really about, let's go back. Let's remember something. Let's do it gently. Let's remember something, or let me take you through, as you were saying, that exercise where I bring you to a place where you start feeling a particular way. So it's more about allowing than it is about forcing. And I think that's a huge difference, because the moment you start to force yourself into something, thinking or feeling, you actually impact in a negative way your performance. You might get lucky. You might, hit 1 or 2, really good plays. But after that, it goes away because you're trying too hard. You're too much in your head and you're not in your body and just allowing that to feel. So, what's your takeaway there? How do you help someone who's trying to push rather than allow?
That's a great point. One of my mentors, Bob Proctor, who is well known in the positive psychology space. Of course, he is a disciple, if you will, of Napoleon Hill. In other words, Napoleon Hill trained Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was a part of Napoleon Hill's organization, and then Earl Nightingale trained Bob Proctor. So he really comes from a direct lineage of Napoleon Hill, who everyone who's read Think and Grow Rich will say, wow, yeah, he's brilliant mind and had the chance to sit at the feet of so many brilliant psychologists and businessmen and women. Bob Proctor always says this. He says, if I want to be free, I gotta be me. And it comes with this feeling and understanding that you are who you are. You just need to find out how unique you are. It's okay if you're short, if you're tall, if you're big, if you're small. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but that sounded awesome right there.
I'm going to take that as a clip.
It doesn't matter, how you are. It's how you use it. If you're a big person, but you're soft, go be a lineman, an offensive lineman. If you're a big guy, but you're dirty and mean, be a defensive lineman or a linebacker. If you're small and quick, 5 foot nothing, go be a slot receiver. Same thing on the volleyball court. It's like, hey, if you're an ogre, you're just big, embrace it. Go be a big outside hitter or a big middle. If you're teeny, go be a libero. So it's just it's about knowing who you are and embracing it. And again, I go back to like one of my players. One of the biggest changes I saw like that was a player who we did a game ready, and then she started playing in state championships for high school, state championship games. So there's a lot on the line, a lot of pressure. And she gets out there and she starts off awesome. I give her a game ready. So of course she starts great, because kids always do. Yep. And then it always becomes like, can we maintain this all the way throughout the match? We'll see. And then she messed up on something, and her coach kind of yelled at her, and he didn't just he pretty much laid into her. And then she kind of crashed. Now, luckily they gone far enough, and the team wasn't at their level really, and they beat them. And so she was kind of up and down the rest of the way. And so between that game and the next, I just had a conversation with her heart to heart. I'm like, why'd that happen? She's like, well, he yelled and I got scared to I didn't want to mess up, and this and the high stakes and state championship and all this and that and this and that. And I'm like, okay, what happens if you hit the ball into the bottom of the net? Oh, they get a point. I'm like, that's it, right? You don't die. No one snipers you out of the stands and kills you and you're done. Life's over, right? She's like, no, quit being silly, Josh, right? Are your parents going to disown you? Everybody hates you now. Like, what if you hit every single ball into the bottom of the net? What if you tripped and fell and smacked your face against the ground? It looked like an absolute fool. By the way, I did that in high school. I tripped and fell into the net. And I didn't listen to my coach. I bought brand new shoes and wore them first time during a game. Tripped and fell. Anyway, so and she was just like, this is totally ridiculous. And I'm like, you're getting my point. This is totally ridiculous, right? What's the most important thing to you in your life? Yeah. And she was like, my mom and my brother. I'm like, are they going to disown you if you are the reason that you lose this game? Not that anybody is that reason. I'm just saying, if you thought you were the reason, do you think they would disown you? No. All right. So you're totally free, man. You're totally free. You can do anything you want. And the most important people in your life don't care. She's like, she went out and she was amazing against the number one team in the state. And they didn't end up beating them. But she and their top player, she went from riding the bench 3 weeks earlier. Let me just say that. 3 weeks earlier, she was riding the bench. And now we had her starting. And then against the number one team in the state, she played like she was one of the top players in the state. So I just love seeing that. Awesome. Right? So
yeah, it's so cool to see when someone, I mean, especially a kid, when a kid can unlock what's inside of them,
So cool.
and they begin to see what is possible and who they can, who I would say who they can be, but it's like, because they can be so much more than that, right? But they just get a taste of that, and how do we encourage them to keep going, and keep that moving forward into everything else in their life and every other aspect of their life. So it's awesome, dude. So how do you take what they do on the court and help them apply that to the rest of their life? How do you really say, okay, yes, this is about volleyball. Yes, this is about what you're doing out there, but it's about so much more.
Yeah, well, they start to get this feeling of like, man, this is amazing. Like the high I feel, like the energy I feel, the focus I feel, and then they're like, could I do this when I have my music performance? I have a recital coming up. Yeah, you could do it right before that. And they're like, could I do it before a test? Like you could do it before a test. They just start. You start seeing, like, they start to connect the dots. Like, I could do this before lots of things. And honestly, I've done this for people before interviews. I've done this for people who are having relationship problems. Um, do this before they come home, so that they come home more peaceful to their spouse, more loving to their children. And it's amazing how this process of this, connecting with the feelings that are the best feelings, the feelings that you enjoy the most, and learning how to point them at the different areas of your life with a very tight focus. It's amazing how your life starts to elevate in every area. And I think that's what happens, is they start to realize my volleyball life is being elevated, but now they start having more confidence. They start realizing that they don't have to put up with this abuse or that abuse. They don't have, they just, they start to, it bleeds over a little bit. And when they identify that it's bleeding over, that's when they start asking the questions. And that's when I can go, yeah, we can do that too, right? It just opens
It's
up a whole world.
it's so cool because kids don't often respond well to being told where to use it, but when they start asking, then it's like, oh, okay, yes. Yes. I've got to be careful, because when my girls start asking me those types of questions, I'm like, I want to give it all to them. But they're like, no, hey, just breathe. Just one little thing
Right?
right now. Don't fire hose them. But yeah, it's such an
Oh
awesome thing
man.
to see when they open up to that possibility. It's funny because before I learned the method that you and I have both been trained in, I don't know where I got this from. I think I was reading some different psychology work in that. But one of the things I learned to do was, and instead of doing the game ready and all that, like I would go back and I would remember one of those moments in my life that was just a standout moment where I could actually, it wasn't about the memory of what happened, but it was about the feeling that I got, right? And I would just get really clear on that feeling, where it was in my body and what size it was, what color it was, what shape it was, all of those types of characteristics, whatever I could identify. And I bring it up full. And then I would imagine, let's say if I was standing outside, I would imagine a circle next to me. And it was that future thing that I wanted to really be good at. And I'd walk from the circle I was in this past, and take that feeling with me and step in that new circle. And then I would have that feeling, and I would imagine myself doing that thing in the future, but having the feeling from the past. And that's the first time I made a connection, like, oh, I can take this everywhere. And it's amazing to see what's happened, and I can go to a couple of stories, but it's like, this is about you, not about me. But I want to share that because it was so impactful to see that. Now to be able to have a methodology to teach that to others is awesome.
It is, and this is so needed. I mean, I just did a game ready for one of our top women's players in the U.S. She just got done winning the league championship in one of the toughest leagues in the world. You could argue the best league in women's volleyball in the world. And she, again, like, there's all sorts of stuff like this in the sports world. There's similar things, but when she was done, like after like us doing a game ready with the animal and all that stuff, and she was just like, "You just changed my career." Like, like it's just like that, like just recognition of how impactful this can be in your life. It's awesome to see the people that I work with recognize that and and be able to apply it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been phenomenal. We had a lot of people come in and out. No one's asked any questions. They've just been listening to us the whole time. So that's been awesome. But yeah, if you guys have, if anyone has questions, you're watching the replay on this, put the questions out there, because we will get back to you. I'm going to make sure that we cover all the questions or anything that comes up there. And anything else on your side? Anything else you want to share as you anything I didn't ask you that you really wanted to share tonight? Let me ask that.
No, that was great. I think all the things that I was feeling, I think we were in tune. We were on the same wavelength there, and I think that if you want to connect with me, you can on if it's volleyball specific. I have an Instagram that is VB Mindsetter. You can go to my website, which is VB for volleyball, right? VBmindsetter.com. If you want to connect here on Facebook, if you're following along on Facebook, you can just look for me, Josh B Life, all one word, and connect with me there. So would love to field any questions anybody has.
And that's just the letter B, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, the letter
awesome.
B for my last name, because as you found out. Exactly.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I put that here quickly in the Facebook chat as I'm watching that. So, but Josh, thank you for coming on. I have been a fan of yours for a long time. I mean, I guess 3 years, whatever we've known each other. You're just this light. You walk in the room and the room lights up, and I know people are seeing that as they watch it tonight. And so, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving it the opportunity for others to hear what you do, your story. You're just an amazing individual. I love that.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and you're the best, man. Thanks, Tony.
Absolutely. So until next time, guys, we are going to sign off here. By the way, I do tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central, which let me translate that. That's 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. Pacific. So it's early. Get your coffee. I will be on CEO Secrets Live with Vinny Rebus, and we're going to be talking about the first of 9 principles that every business has to obey. They're just kind of like the laws of the universe, if you will. And so join us here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, and I will see you then. Have a great night.